We have three industry leaders coming on the stage right now. It's an exciting topic of how do you bring everything together, the data, the analytics, in the context of smart or intelligent hospitals. So I have Atif Chaughtai from Red Hat Global Healthcare Leader. Atif, you want to take the stage? And we have Brad Busick from Chaughtai Health System and Satrajit Misra from Canon Medical Systems.
Thank you, Puneet. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the last session for the day. I had that spotlight really focused on me, so I'm going to have to look this way, so don't take it personally. I do realize that we are between you guys and the refreshments and the big glass of beer that is being served outside, so we'll try to make it as entertaining and as much as packed as much possible. So I truly have the honor of introducing two of the distinguished panel. Satrajit Misra, he's from Canon. He actually has a very interesting history that I will take a moment to read. The Senior Vice President and Chief Sales and Marketing Officer, is responsible for overseeing sales and marketing, performance strategy and alignment of booking and revenue growth and development of US market. Prior to this position, he served as the Vice President in Marketing and Senior Director at CT Business Unit, including increasing sales and launching new product, and award-winning Aquilian One Vision. And before joining Canon Medical System, he was doing product marketing for nuclear medicine at Philips Healthcare and was Medical System Director and Business Management at Siemens. So he's had a lot of experience in specifically medical environment dealing with smart technology around patient intervention. Also with us is Brad Busick. He's the SVP and CIO of Multicare. Previously, he was the CTO for that organization. And while him being a CTO, he developed system processes, technology, and overall software solution design to meet the customer needs in the case of the patient needs. He also held a high-profile role at McDonald Miller and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We had a very interesting discussion about that this morning. And if you're looking for funding, you need to talk to him, sorry. A business transformation, he also won a bunch of awards. He was the 150 award winner and TED speaker. With that, our topic today is about smart hospital, AI, cloud, and the edge. I don't think we missed any other buzzwords in putting anything in this title. But let me give you an idea what a smart hospital is. I'll set the context and then turn it over to the panelists. Very simply, smart hospital is about improving patient outcome and improving patient experience while driving efficiencies. That's what smart hospital is. Now, how do you do that? You use technology, you use new innovative ideas, change culture, change processes, bring in incubate new technology that is proven to actually deliver better patient experience. So with that, I'm going to now ask the panelists a series of questions. So what has been your experience in building a smart hospital or being involved in a smart hospital?
You first. Well, it's good to be with you. Thanks for hanging around. We'll make this worth your while so you can enjoy your beer here in 30 minutes. As mentioned, I'm actually new to healthcare. I led strategy and planning and architecture for Bill and Melinda at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And it's a really interesting opportunity when you have an $86 billion endowment to go spend. One of the opportunities that was prevalent across the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Seattle area, was the investment in smart buildings, and then went into smart hospitals. You can go look it up, but it hit really close to home for me and for many that have kids with this idea that in a smart hospital, if the HVAC system isn't smart enough to detect moisture in the ducts, in the middle of your surgery, your OR, your ER, and the spores from the mold get inside your kid in surgery, you have death across the entire patient panel. That's a real story. You can go look it up. And actually, that was the impotence for what started the thinking and investment around how do we actually put smart technology around the things that nobody cares about until they fail. If the HVAC in this room failed, all of us would be really uncomfortable. We actually think that comfort in hospitals is a competitive advantage. The number one complaint for people in hospitals isn't that the food sucks, or that my doctor's slow, or that the Wi-Fi's lagging. It's that I'm hot. It's that I'm cold. And when you're at your most vulnerable, this is actually where you want to be taken care of. And so thinking about the things behind the walls that you can't see, but also the way that you deliver care in a more meaningful, and in some cases innovative way. I love the thinking on the last panel. This is what started to get me excited about investment and pushing in a space that frankly has lagged for decades. When banking is further along in innovation than healthcare, we have a big problem.
Well said.
Thank you, Brad. So a little bit around the context of smart hospitals. First, let's talk about hospitals, then let's talk about smart. Hospitals are ecosystems where sick people come in along with their families, and hopefully less sick people or maybe even healthy people leave. But in reality, it's not always the case. There's a lot of morbidities, there's a lot of readmission, people having to come back again. Many instances, people leave with more than what they came in with, infections. And in that ecosystem, you have a whole bunch of caregivers that are working nonstop under very high stress environment. You know, we have a paucity of resources, there's a lot of burnout, and that is the ecosystem we are trying to optimize, because at the end, we want all to be healthy, we want a healthy population. And that's where all of the folks in this room can bring a lot of value, because most of the big companies like ours, large OEMs, we are innovating in our own respective silos. We are trying to make a better mousetrap, something we've been doing for the last 30, 40 years. We keep trying to make a better CAT scanner or an MRI or PET scanner. But there are lots of gaps in the way the instrumentation talks to each other, and at the end of the day, you know, drive care coordination and not drop the ball on the patient so that we actually drive overall population health improvement. That's why we have an urgent need for improving the smartness, quote unquote, of a hospital, because we are all struggling here. Nobody has a solution right now. We are dealing with elevated costs. A lot of healthcare systems are making huge losses. There's a huge paucity of resources, significant caregiver burnouts, and the population in general in this country is obese and getting more obese. Very unhealthy situation, low insurance, payers are struggling. So it's like horns of dilemma. Everyone is struggling in this ecosystem. So anything we can do in terms of innovation to reduce cost, as Atif said, improve quality of care, improve patient and caregiver experience will go a long way. And that's why we need smart hospitals.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight. So I can personally relate with my father, who's 89 years old. The first thing when he goes to the hospital is complains that he's cold. Next thing he does is starts cursing that why is this room so cold? And we basically pile up blankets on him. And you know, in the hospital, those are very thin blankets. That's his number one concern about being uncomfortable. And what you just mentioned also, that is so true, because we experience it on a daily basis. It affects every single one of us. Because if it's not efficient, we feel it. And there's a lot of loss of productivity, stress that comes with it, especially for elderly, right? So pulling on that thread a little bit, we talked about the HVAC example, we talked about what you're doing in your own silo. All of this is in some way data-driven. What are your thoughts about the data and how it plays into the smart hospital? Where should it be kept? Is it analyzed in the cloud? Where the innovation model should plug into the data value stream? Because we all struggle with data, and Bridget, who opened the keynote, said we need 3.5 million healthcare workers by 2030. We are that much short, right? So how do we use that to drive innovation or streamline processes leveraging this data to solve for this problem?
Yeah, I love that question, and I love your thinking about the call to action. The answer that we're seeking is in this room. There's a really fascinating thing in healthcare that I'm calling intellectual arrogance, and it goes a little something like this. I'm in healthcare, and I'm a doctor, and Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos tried this thing and it failed, but we're still here. Here's what they don't realize. Amazon's failure, Berkshire's failure, their $4 billion loss is a rounding error. It's actually more than your entire OPEX and CAPEX combined for a healthcare system like mine. They're going to take that learning and apply it to the very next venture, whether it's One Medical or whatever you want to call it. That data is gold. And so most organizations, particularly in healthcare, don't actually know what to do with the data that they're gathering. So I'll take a real life example, and I loved your call out on the nursing shortage. In the Pacific Northwest, we are dying for nurses. We have traveling nurses that are 21, 22 years old. They're making $500,000, $600,000 a year. Washington State lost $2.4 billion last year. Why? Our volume's at an all-time high. Our revenue's at an all-time high. There's no margin, and when there's no margin, there's no mission, particularly for a nonprofit. How do we do more with the same with data? How do we do more with less? So we saw this problem with our nurses. We actually went to the front lines, went to the Gemba and heard from the nurses and said, what are the biggest pebbles in your shoe? How can we help? What would it look like to go deploy a fleet of autonomous robots that all they did was do the things that you don't want to do? Walk to the pharmacy, pick up the meds. Walk to the lab, pick up the specimen. Go fetch my AirPods from the room. Go get your Grubhub downstairs. Why? Because every moment spent doing that is one less moment with your kid at the bedside. So I've seen some nodding heads. So you see what I'm saying, right? So that was an interesting problem. We actually made it actionable. So we decided to roll out a pilot, 90 days, 4 robots. In 90 days, this robot did 6,000 tasks. It walked literally over 1 million steps. And that was just taking weight off of the nurses' shoulders. It wasn't IT driving these. These were nurses telling it what to go and do. What was actually more powerful was the patient sentiment of a robot delivering a cancer drug to a child. And its eyes turning to hearts and watching the patient going, oh my God, this is amazing. It impacted both culture, and we used that data to say, you know what? We actually could go do more with this. And so we used that data to take additional weight off of our nurses in our other 12 hospitals. And now this is just part of what we do. That's one real-time example. I think the second is the things in hospitals that we admire and again don't care about until they break. Like when your spouse goes in for an MRI or a CT and they get stuck in the machine. Or I'm sorry, we're gonna have to reschedule your appointment because the machine's broken. We deployed a predictive capability called Glassbeam that actually tells us that those machines are going to go down before they go down. Why? It's revenue. It's patient experience. It's data. I know more about my equipment, because it's my data, by the way. It's not the manufacturer's. I know more about my equipment than my OEM does. So it's when we get a chance to use that data with partners like Canon to do something with the data and not just admire it, that we actually get, to the previous dialogue, a better patient outcome.
Great examples. I mean, one of the panelists actually mentioned, I'll go to you in a second, one of the panelists mentioned exactly this problem. There was a survey done by the NPR which said 40% of the nurses want to change their jobs. That's a big problem when we already have a gap. So please, back to you.
Thank you, Atif. Brad, who says our machines break down? They don't.
Your machines don't, that's right.
But they do. The reality is, not only do they break down when you want them least to break down, right? 2 a.m. in the morning in an ER when you have this huge deluge of patients coming in. Believe me, if you walk to an ER department, their maximum peak loads are between 12 and 4 a.m. I don't know why, but that's when all the interesting things happen. And that's when you want high availability, you want quick decision making, there's a lot of chaos going on. So one of the areas we have been innovating on is exactly as Brad said. We have partnered with a startup, which is an AI ML based startup that has developed core competence around analyzing of log files and machine data that comes out. And we are looking at two things. One is expanding utilization and predicting failure. We have right now connected over 2,500 sockets or 2,500 hospitals to the system. I'm talking about Glassbeam. And we are beginning to learn from the data, and we believe that in the coming years we'll make a huge difference in terms of availability and predictiveness. The other area we're innovating on is building a lot of using AI ML. So we have invested heavily into deep convolution neural networks. So if you look at the medical imaging, we talk a lot about AI. In reality, it's not AI, it's pattern matching. We do AI to train the algorithms, and then after that we just pattern match. And then every 6 months we put in new algorithms on our system. So it's primarily pattern matching or pattern recognition that we do. So we have started looking at building that intelligence at the ER. One of the big challenges is the ER physician is, they're great doctors, but they're not experts at interpreting images. They know, they've gone through med school, so they know definitely a lot, but they're not radiologists. And the radiologists are not on duty. Very few hospitals have radiologists on duty because they're overloaded. They're reading 400 scans a day, and they're tired. So you have a huge issue. A patient comes in with chest pain. Okay, so it could be because, and half of the patients, they have chest pain because of gas. So, and they're clogging up the whole pipeline, because then you have genuine people with heart attack who are not getting cared for. So you want to triage that and send them home. Give them milk of magnesia and send them home. And then of the ones who have a stenosed vessel or a occluded coronary, you want to see, okay, how much are they blocked? Is it greater than 80%? If it is, then send them to the cath lab and stent them, no questions asked. If it's below 50%, send them home and refer them to a cardiologist so they can have some high-intensity statin treatments. But then if they're in the middle, then you got to do something. This simple algorithm is a nightmare. It's not easy. And you have an overloaded emergency physician with nurses, and they're trying to figure all this out while you have patients walking in with gunshot wounds, with trauma, with stroke, and all this is going on in a high-intensity environment. So we are investing a lot on creating that intelligence right at the edge. So your question is, where do you handle data? So we're beginning to put a lot of intelligence at the edge devices so we can start doing automatic triage of patients and the three areas we are looking at are stroke, the triple rollout, which is pulmonary embolism, aortic dissection, and coronaries. And then we are also looking at trauma to detect bleeds. So when people come in with a large injury, you want to make sure there's no vessel, there's no vessel rupture, so you don't have to intervene right away. So it's making a huge difference already and saving lives. Over to you, Atif.
Yeah, thank you. Great insight. So one common thing that I noticed that both of your comments had was a steward understanding of the business process that the hospital is, or the emergency room is involved in. And if you're looking to make something smart, we need to understand the process. And guess what? All of you can do that by volunteering at the emergency department, right? You can volunteer and observe what their process looks like. And maybe then from there, come up with new ideas on how I can improve that process, right? And bring in the larger ecosystem and the resources that you are aware of to that picture to solve those problems. So with that, I will ask one more question is around ecosystem. So in your quest to make something intelligent and smart, right? It's not one thing, there's multiple things are involved, and there's a huge ecosystem involved in it, including the people, process, and technology. So what, from your perspective, you guys are doing or is needed in this space to really innovate from an ecosystem perspective?
Yeah, that's always $1 million question. We have a really cool acronym in IT. It's called CBNU. cool, but not useful. And IT shops are full of these things. We deploy something, then hope it works, and then are angry when it fails. Right now in the Pacific Northwest, Multicare is going to be the very first system on the West Coast to utilize drone delivery for labs and then pharmacy at home. Sounds cool. The workflow behind this is outrageous. How do you get something from the patient room to the pharmacy, from the pharmacy to the drone, from the drone to the patient's specified delivery location securely, bring the drone back, land it, load its belly up again, and get it to take back off? The workflow for this is daunting. And we're partnering with engineers from Silicon Valley and Seattle, right? We have some really awesome companies right along the I-5 corridor, from Microsoft and Amazon and Boeing and Costco and Starbucks. We're literally leveraging everyone from UI and UX, human-centered design, all the way to the clinicians to say, what would this look like for you? So it actually is impacting the people and the process. The technology, I actually think, is going to become a commodity. Drone delivery is going to be a commodity. Someone on my board kind of challenged, so you mean I'm going to look up in the sky and see a bunch of black dots flying around? And the answer is yes. And wherever you land on the scale environmentally for that is neither here nor there. It's coming, and Amazon will be the first to push it, along with CVS and others. How do we actually make it easy to use and valuable? And so that's something that we're dealing with right now, real time in Seattle.
So if you look at where we can innovate in terms of process, which was the core of your question, if you look at the healthcare system and have an artist's rendering of a healthcare system, it'll start looking like the Grand Canyon, full of gaps. There's gaps everywhere. There's gaps within the health system. There's a huge gap from an access standpoint. Many of the patients, they need to be cared at home, and we have very little means to actually do that effectively. There are care coordination gaps within a specialty. If you just look at one specialty like oncology or cardiology, huge gaps between the referring physician and the caregiver and the nursing and all that. And so a big area of innovation where big companies like the GE, Siemens, Canons of the world are not able to solve very well is in this gap. So if Silicon Valley startups can start innovating and closing the gap, that will be a huge contribution to the health system.
Great feedback, thanks. I will just tell you, if the drone is coming to my house, they better program for my dog, because he will chew that drone up. And then if the dog doesn't touch it, my 2-year-old son will definitely get it.
Well, not to mention drone flying over the Appalachians could get shot down.
Absolutely.
We forget that part.
I thought about that, the West Virginia example. For sure. Anyway, so great feedback and good comments. So let's try to bring it home for the audience here. What is the most important element that you think is needed, besides the things that we mentioned, that we might have not mentioned, in building a smart hospital and bringing edge and cloud and AI? What is the most important element, do you think, that innovators should consider in engaging in this space?
So the way I see it, and it's just my personal view, I'm sure, Brad, you'll have your own. I see it as it's a AAA problem. Access, awareness, and affordability. We have a huge access problem. We have people who need care cannot access care. It's because either they're not aware or they can't afford. So we have tried to solve for the access problem. We did a very nice project jointly with J&J for lung screening. So if you look at, we put a CT on a mobile and we put an in vitro lab on the same mobile, so you could do a scan and a blood test, and you look at the texture of the lung, and you look at some of the floating RNAs in blood, and you could immediately see if something is going sideways, and then bring that individual into a hospital for biopsies or more invasive treatment. And we've been running this pilot for almost 6 months in West Virginia University. And if you look at WVU, a lot of their healthcare is around Morgantown, but they serve a huge area where you find moonshine depots easier than hospitals. Very difficult to get to, remote areas, heavily wooded, in mountains, and we're trying to solve this through mobility and access. So I think fundamentally we need to solve for these three. We need to build access. Second is we need to invest heavily in awareness. How do we use internet to its fullest to build awareness in the communities and get them activated? Because many of our patients are old and they don't know how to use information. They may not even know how to log into an internet portal. So how do you get that information to them through wearables or through phone devices and all that, and make it very simple, visual, maybe use voice, that kind of technology. So that's around awareness. And then affordability. How do we collapse the cost of delivery? What can we do to take cost out of the system? These are the areas where I think if you look at the collective brains and the thought equity we have in the Silicon Valley, I honestly think we can do wonderful things together. Because if we leave it to just the big companies to innovate, it's not going to happen. That's right. We are very siloed and we are very one track. We need multidimensional thinking.
Yeah, I'll double down on that and place the opportunity inside the hospital on this outrageous problem called interoperability. Nothing talks. We're talking about trying to integrate with legacy systems that were born, green screens, right? And then you've got these wild cloud-based SaaS platforms that want to talk to it, and now I have to extract it to an EDW, and I have to, go to AWS or Google or Microsoft and say, hey, can we use this Azure Health Cloud thing to try to get these two things to talk? And then how do I go upstream with the payer? So that when you come in, you don't have to wait for a doctor to fax your insurance company to say, are you approved for your shoulder surgery? I mean, I laugh, but these are the real issues that we're facing. And so interoperability, I think, is a huge opportunity. And then frankly, a dose of humility and some impatient optimism. It is a tiring game. I mean, I had hair before I started in healthcare, and I'm getting after it. Our families deserve it. And so I get really excited about, to your point, the brain equity in this room. I think the answer's here, and I think healthcare is ready for it. So.
I'm not sure if that was a hook to get off the stage or it was really appreciated. But anyway, great insight. So, one of our previous panelists here was from HCA. She was the chief medical officer. She mentioned about the SPOT system. Actually, I know about the SPOT system because my company, Red Hat, was involved in building that. And what they did was actually lean into exactly what Brad was saying. They tried to solve this interoperability problem because the data was stuck in a legacy system called EHR, right? It's a monolith. And then there were sensors around the patient, and they wanted to get a hold of that data to run algorithms to detect sepsis, right? And sepsis is a very deadly disease. And by doing so, getting hold of the data and building their own platform around that, now they actually use the same platform for triaging during COVID time, bed management, right? So think of this as not a single point in time problem to solve, but think of it from a platform perspective, how you can enable the innovation, right? There's a common concept in healthcare is like, hey, we want to build a data platform. Every pharmaceutical, healthcare provider, patient, everybody's wanting to build it, right? So can we innovate on that concept with interoperability, with the open source communities that are out there, with the OEMs that all have to play together in this space to drive that innovation? With that, any last comments from you guys? Please go ahead.
I did have a comment on interoperability. So you think very interesting thing in life is everyone wants to make the world a better place. Let there be peace, as John Lennon would have said. And everyone wants to monetize. They want to become wealthy. So that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of interoperability challenges, because there's a lot of data hostage going on. if you make data available to everyone, ubiquitous access to data, you lose your strategic business advantage. You give away, core trade secrets. And so there is a general reluctance from large players to make data freely available. While we want all of us to have this wonderful world where everybody shares, reality, nobody likes to share. Because the moment you share, you also start sharing your potential to make money. So there has to be legislative and legal frameworks. It's not just enough to have work groups and all that, which is what we have been doing, through TiEcon and all that. We need a top-down legal framework that makes it mandatory to open up the data repositories. And until that happens, it's going to be challenging because everyone likes to hold data hostage. And the whole concept of data democratization is utopian at this point.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I would probably just wrap up, and I know folks are thirsty, with just some gratitude. I think the competitive nature of business sometimes trumps patient care. And I fundamentally believe that everybody deserves the right to lead a healthy and productive life. Technology is an enabler for that, and so listening to the panel today gives me hope. And I think right now in a dark world, I think we all could use a little hope. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, everybody.